Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming. It's great to see so many of you here. My name is David from Fountain Partnership, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to the Pharma Marketing Evolution, Revolution, and the New Normal. In this webinar, we'll be exploring real-world technologies and strategies for the future, the latest in both tech and tactics to maximize your profits. And to take us through this today are three highly regarded experts in their fields, combining marketing tech and pharmaceuticals. Before we come on to them, I should let you know that at the end, we're going to have a 10-minute Q&A. So I'll be reading out questions that you submit throughout the webinar. You can do this via the chat below. If you could also name the person that you're directing this to as well, that would be handy for us. So we've got three speakers up. Chris French from Earthware, Rob Morley from Fountain Partnership, and Kym Jacks-Bryant from Norgine. First up is Chris. So Chris is the Managing Director at Earthware, a multi-award winning digital creative agency specializing in healthcare, and having spent 10 years in senior commercial roles within pharma companies, Chris has a passion for helping the healthcare sector utilize technology to solve problems of both professionals and patients alike. So we'll start with you, Chris. I'll hand over, and to all the attendees, I'll see you on the other side. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the meeting today. So yeah, I'd like to start by just talking about a bit about my experience, really. So as someone who's delivered digital projects in pharma now for nearly 20 years, I could say that I've had my fair share of frustrations over the years when trying to get enthusiasm and momentum behind pushing digital adoption forwards in the industry. I must have had countless conversations over the years with pharma medics and compliance teams, and even pharma marketers, where I've heard the words, "It can't be done." So amongst all of the bad news we've endured over the last 10 weeks in my professional life, I've actually found it incredibly refreshing to start to hear pharma people say things like, how can we make this digital? And perhaps even more exciting, what's the fastest way that we can make this digital? It's always seemed strange to me that an industry that is by its very nature incredibly innovative consistently brings up the rear when compared to other sectors for digital adoption. And I think there's actually a really good reason why pharma should be looking to optimize the digital activity, regardless of the situation we currently find ourselves in. If you look at data from IQVIA, it shows that in all of the major markets, the top selling newly launched pharma brands have an overall higher share of digital contacts with HCPs and other launches. And in fact, across all 4 quarters following launch, the average share of digital contacts was significantly higher for those top performing launch brands. So digital does seem to work in our sector. And of course, there is that even more pressing reason right now why pharma must move to a more digitally led approach. I think our traditional model of face-to-face rep activity has been pulled out from beneath our feet. And I personally believe it's highly unlikely that after such a long period without seeing reps face-to-face, that healthcare institutions are going to swing open their doors and invite pharma reps back into surgeries and hospitals in the way that we used to. So for us as an industry, I think the world as we know it has changed forever. So what to do? Well, I think to its credit, pharma has in recent years started to really embrace lots of different channels. But where I think we haven't done as good a job as we might have is in joining those channels up. As an industry, we still tend to utilize channels in isolation. But I think we will see an explosion of integrated channel marketing over the next few years. And certainly a lot of the big players in the market, such as Viva and IQVIA, are really pushing companies now to think in a much more joined up way. For example, reps sending triggering emails after a sales call. So I'd encourage all of you to spend some time looking at your channel mix and think about how you can help your customers move around your ecosystem with each channel promoting and signposting the others. And of course, that's what it's all about. It's about helping our customers and our patients. So for me, I think the final stage that we're going to see in digital evolution in pharma will be one where we really do put the customer or the patient at the center of everything we do, helping them access the information that they want about our brands at a time and in a format that suits them. In my view, I think right now there are a few channels that offer a significant opportunity for pharma to offer greater value to its customers, and that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this talk. So those channels I'm going to focus on today are chatbots and live chat, e-learning, and webinars. And I'm just going to start with chatbots. So those of you that know me, or maybe follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, will know that I can't stop banging on about chatbots. And Kym will agree with that as well. But I do believe that for a lot of pharma companies, this is a technology that's a bit of a no-brainer, especially right now when face-to-face activity is so restricted. So why should you consider a chatbot? Well, there's hundreds of articles and surveys and studies that have looked at consumer behavior and the role that chatbots might play in customer experience. And I will share a reference list after the event today of the references that I've used here. And I think it's really important that we do remember that healthcare professionals and patients are consumers like the rest of us. And these days, in our interactions with banks or retailers, travel and utility companies, we all expect, in fact, we demand instant access to our questions and instant responses. Yet the average time it takes a company to respond to a message is 10 hours. So it's no surprise, I think, that consumers say that companies need to transform how they engage with them. And 3/4 of consumers say chatbots will transform their expectations of customer experience over the next 5 years. And that's really driven an explosion of chatbot utilization across other sectors. Last year's CMO survey found that 89% of companies with revenues in the $500 million to $1 billion category, which is the sort of size where the UK affiliates of medium to large size pharma companies would sit, are now using conversational AI for customer service. And whilst there's still very few examples of the use of chatbot technology in healthcare, there are some quite interesting case studies. I'm going to share a couple of those with you today. So this first example is a chatbot that we've developed with Norgine, and it's aimed at patients who are preparing for a colonoscopy. Now, I think Kym's going to talk a little bit more about this, perhaps in more detail later, but what I'll say now is that I love the why behind this project. There was a really clear unmet need for these patients in that, you know, the night before their colonoscopy, when nobody else is around to ask, the pharmacies are closed, GPs aren't around, this chatbot neatly provides the solution of answering those unmet questions that they might have. This is a chatbot that allows free text input, and it offers support for patients via video and animations and text responses, as well as signposting other relevant materials that would help the patient at that time. And as I said, I think Kym's going to touch on this a little bit later as well. Now, one of the great things I think about chatbots is that you can repurpose the same bot across multiple channels. And this is a really good example of that. Teva developed a chatbot for their brand Braltus, and they actually embedded it into their online advertising, which in this example that you can see on the screen is the respiratory section of MIMS. So when a healthcare professional hovers over the ad or clicks on it, the chatbot appears, and the healthcare professional can then have a conversation with the brand right there in the ad, at a time and a place when they're thinking about prescribing. So that's really, if you think about it, that's really powerful time to be communicating with customers. But obviously chatbots can't be programmed to cover every possible question. And sometimes an inquiry is so complex, it does need to be addressed by a human. And for me, that's where I think live chat comes in. Now, again, there's nothing new about live chat. It's been used in other sectors for many years, and it hasn't really been adopted in pharma, which I think is a little strange when you consider how much pharma companies invest into medical information or into customer services teams. So live chat can be a standalone channel, but it can also be integrated with a chatbot. And in this example, you can see how a conversation initiated with a chatbot on the right can then be handed off to a live person whose screen you can see on the left. And they can see the conversation history, which means they can seamlessly take over that conversation and have a free text chat, or they can choose from pre-prepared responses with the end user. They can also attach videos and other documents that might be relevant to that conversation. Of course, if there's no live chat agent available, either because we're outside of office hours or maybe because they're all busy on calls or handling other inquiries, then the chatbot can revert back to taking users' details and giving them other contact information for them to get further help. So I think from a customer experience perspective, integrating a chatbot with live chat really does give you the best of both worlds. So is there an ROI? Well, we find that chatbots can typically answer up to 80% of users' questions. And that, of course, frees up the time of the people who would otherwise be dealing with those inquiries, whether that's via email or phone. Typically, around 1/3 of all visitors to websites that have a chatbot use the chatbot. So that means even on low traffic websites, you could be looking at over 1,500 conversations a year, which if you look at that on a cost per conversation basis, that's a fraction of the cost of a human handling those inquiries. We also see that 70% of pharma chatbot users rate them as helpful. So that's immediately telling us that they do see this as a good customer service tool. And when you look at the use of chatbots in advertising, we see that drives a huge increase in the interaction rates compared to standard advertising. So again, you're getting more bang for your buck. And finally, I think chatbots give you really, really valuable data because you get to see all of the questions that customers have about your products, and then you can use those to inform your future communication activities. So let's move on to e-learning. Now, I said earlier that we really need to start thinking about putting the customer at the center of all we do. And if that's the case, then I think it's important that we ask them what they want from pharmaceutical companies. Now, interestingly, in this survey of 2,800 healthcare professionals, medical education, educational content, and new clinical data were the top 3 types of information that they wanted to get from pharma. Yet, perhaps not unsurprisingly, the majority of information they receive is promotional information. So I think access to high quality education is really crucial for healthcare professionals, but it is harder for them to come by than maybe you'd think. For example, we were looking at a project last year in vaccines where we interviewed lots of primary care nurses and GPs, and across the board, they were telling us they were desperate for access to high quality and free education. Now, of course, traditionally farmers delivered that education through live events, but I have seen an increasing number of companies now looking at on-demand e-learning as a way of upskilling healthcare professionals on the diseases in which their drugs are used. Traditionally, I think farmers delivered its e-learning content through third parties, usually medical publishers. And I can see a lot of sense in that, in that taking your content out to where healthcare professionals are. To use an old marketing phrase, you fish where the fish are. But I think the problem is that working in that way, the publishers are the ones that own that relationship and therefore own the access to the customer. And I believe that the age is now upon us where it's time for pharma to stop building its own communities, to start having rich, long-term relationships with their customers. In this case study here, which is a platform built by Takeda in Europe. And they've done just that with this particular platform. They deliver e-learning, they manage all of their live event registrations, they deliver webinars, and they also even host closed groups within this platform. So for example, if they have an ad board, they can invite all the members of the ad board to the group, and then they can share files and have conversations on the platform. So every interaction that the healthcare professional has with Takeda in an educational capacity goes through this platform, and that allows them to build up strong relationships over time and generate permissions for other marketing opportunities outside of the platform. Of course, I think third-party publishers will continue to have an important role to play, but for me, instead of hosting content, their role will be more as a channel to direct users to pharma's own solutions. Now, it goes without saying that unless the content is great, healthcare professionals aren't going to want to engage with it. So here's my vision for pharma content nirvana. So what I'd love to see is less static, boring slides and much more interactive, engaging content. I'd like to see presentations being less wordy and much more audiovisual. I'm thinking video and I'm thinking podcasts. I'd like to see content that's less designed for the desktop and more designed for consumption on the move. So imagine healthcare professionals asking Alexa to play them the latest keynote speaker on their commute to work. I'd like to see content that's less one size fits all for the masses and much more about personalized and tailored content to individuals' interests. I'd like to see pharma move away from delivering hours and hours of monotonous presentations and instead delivering more short, sharp, bite-sized snippets of learning, which studies suggest is actually really effective. And finally, I think our content needs to be less about the pharma company view and much more about independent expert opinion from thought leaders and innovators. Which brings us on to webinars. Now, of course, over the last 2 months, every man and his dog has become very familiar with video conferencing, and there's certainly been a sudden shift towards webinars by pharma companies who've been forced to rethink symposia that they maybe had planned for later in the year. But I actually think that pharma has been missing a trick with webinars for a long time. We should have been doing this years ago. Because webinars are quick, they're easy to set up, and they're certainly very cost effective compared to live events. Also, I think webinars, if they're done in the right way, can deliver a really rich interactive experience. So here are a few of our tips webinars. So firstly, think about the platform you use. You might want to consider a platform that offers both synchronous and asynchronous communication, because this then allows individuals to either join the live event or they can then participate later when it's most convenient for them. These days, lots of platforms offer features such as polls or surveys and collaboration via discussion threads or kind of chat. So really think about how you want to engage your audience and what interactions you'd like to have with them, and that will help you to decide which platform to use. I'd encourage you all to make sure that any content you create through webinars can last longer and reach further than just the webinar itself. So make sure you do record the event, which then allows you to share it online afterwards. And also think about how you can use that recording either as sharing the whole webinar or maybe breaking it into individual talks. You can also continue the polls afterwards if you've run polls during the event, and you can also continue that discussion. And I would really recommend that if you've had registrants for the webinar, you can then use your permissions to email those registrants when there's things updated about the webinar or when there's new questions or content that's been added. Think about your agenda and your meeting format as well. So in face-to-face meetings, sessions tend to be interspersed with breaks and time for networking. And they also tend to have a range of topics to try and keep the interest levels high for those that are attending the meeting. And I think that virtual meetings really should try and follow that same format. You should look to keep meetings less than 60 minutes so that you can keep people's attention. And then you can always take the discussion offline afterwards. And if you do have a lot of content to cover, think about doing a virtual conference. These can take place over a period of days or weeks, and the content can then be broken down into shorter bite-sized sections. Finally, I think promotion is absolutely key. Use all of your other channels to drive signups like I talked about earlier, so make sure all those channels are integrated. And if it is a key event, you might want to consider using paid digital marketing, and Rob's going to come on and talk about digital marketing in the next session today. So what does the ROI look like for a webinar? Well, again, the cost per attendee for a webinar is typically much lower than the cost of, for example, a rep call. But of course, that does vary depending on how many attendees you achieve and how much you want to spend on marketing the event. We've definitely seen more and more interest in webinars in recent weeks. And the partners that we work with to run webinars are delivering on average at the moment 2 a day for pharmaceutical companies. And the sort of attendance that you can see in this case study here, which was 444 for this particular event, that's pretty typical of the sort of attendances that they're seeing at the moment in pharma-sponsored webinars. And I think the great thing about webinars is that they are very measurable. So you will know how long users have spent in the session. You can see how engaged they were depending on the platform you use. And of course, you do get the data from audience polls, which you can then use that to inform your future marketing. So to summarize, I think the world has changed, and I think it has changed forever. I think that chatbots do offer an enhanced customer experience opportunity for pharmaceutical companies, providing those 24/7 touch points that healthcare professionals and patients as consumers demand. We know that healthcare professionals really rate medical education as the most important content that they want to get from pharma, but I think it's time for us now to start building those learning communities rather than just giving that educational content away. And I think webinars represent a really flexible, credible alternative live events, particularly right now when we can't be delivering events face-to-face. And finally, I think all of the solutions discussed here can generate a great ROI, and it's really important when you're setting up any of these channels that you think about the KPIs and the ROI that you want to deliver so that you can measure success. So thank you very much. As I said, my name is Chris Finch, and you can get me at on the email address here, chris@earthware.co.uk. Or if you've got your mobile phone to hand, you can scan that QR code, and that will enable you to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'd be more than happy to have conversation with you on LinkedIn or via email. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris. That was awesome. It sparked a few questions from the audience and also from myself. I actually thought I was a bit of a techie, but clearly not nearly in comparison there. So thank you very much. That was really good.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So our second speaker is Rob Morley from Fountain Partnership. He's a commercial director, co-founder, and also my boss.
Thank you, David.
No worries, man. So everyone is aware, Fountain Partnership is a global Google award-winning digital marketing agency. We've worked with national and international pharma marketing campaigns using our forecasting model to anticipate and to continue to measure return on investment. So I'll hand over to you now, Rob.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everyone. As David said, I'm one of the founders of Fountain. So in 15 minutes, there's quite a lot I could have talked about this morning, and I appreciate that there's potentially a mixed audience amongst you. I'm going to guess that there will be a mixture of seasoned digital marketeers, seasoned marketeers, but I think there will be definitely brands that are now looking at digital marketing as building on what Chris said, possibly more out of necessity at this point in time than anything else. So I want to try and speak to all of you, and this is going to be talking about some fundamentals around methodology, a few tactical things, but also what do we need to kind of focus on long term. So let's start with the biggest mistake in marketing, and this is definitely the biggest mistake in digital marketing, and that's focusing on activities, not outcomes. So time and time again, when we see campaigns, when we take over campaigns, what we tend to see is that where those campaigns have gone wrong is they've been lost in the quagmire of activity, and everyone has forgot what it is they're working towards. So what's the medicine for this? How do you sort of approach marketing? Well, we believe that the most successful marketing campaigns begin with the end in mind. So if you're sitting down for the first time, or you're at a point where you're thinking about new digital marketing campaigns, I think it's really important to consider what are your aims. And these are more the commercial metrics rather than the marketing metrics, which I'll talk about in a moment. So it's thinking about, well, how many customers do we want to acquire? What's our revenue target? Possibly even what's the EBIT of this profit center? So that means for us that digital marketing actually, it doesn't start as a whiteboard exercise, as most people might think marketing starts, but it actually starts as a spreadsheet exercise, especially in the age of digital, where we've moved away from the kind of more traditional madmen and more into the mathmen. So one of the best things you can do in a spreadsheet is to put together a forecast model, even on a basic level. And when I say spreadsheet exercise, I don't just mean an arbitrary budget figure sitting in a spreadsheet cell. I literally mean putting in targets, as I said before, how many customers do we want, and commercial metrics in that vein. And as you can see there, by doing that, you start to sense check the numbers, and it gives you an idea of investment levels and upside opportunities. So to give you an example of a few really important metrics that you can calculate in a spreadsheet and start to think about as you build a digital marketing campaign, these for us are the three most important. So if you understand how many customers you want to acquire, and that gives you an idea of revenue target, you need to understand what are you willing to pay to acquire one. What are the costs per clicks around that? Or how much does it cost to get a visitor from a platform onto yours? And what's the required website conversion rate? And this is a metric that sometimes throws people. So we understand conversion rate as for every 100 visitors, what percentage will buy or potentially download, depending on your conversion metric. But what we want to think about is, what does our website need to convert at for our marketing funnel to work? So this is quite important. So once we've got that in place, once we've got together some metrics and we know what we're aiming for, and we've got some fundamental numbers around that, what's extremely critical is that we set up what's called full tracking. Now, the seasoned marketeers amongst you will understand this. You'll probably look at this and think, well, yeah, of course, why wouldn't you? But I can tell you from the agency perspective, we've walked into absolutely huge companies and seen that tracking analytics being linked to platforms isn't where it needs to be, and that the tracking isn't set up correctly, there isn't an attribution model in place, and therefore the marketing data isn't being recorded reliably and accurately. So if you're entering into this for the first time, this is something that needs to be on your list, being able to track from that first click all the way through to the lifetime value of the customer, if possible. If you think you have got tracking in place, why not audit it? Why not see if it's been set up correctly? So how do we keep track of it all? Well, we use what's called UTM codes. These are just snippets of simple code you can add to the end of a URL to track performance and campaigns. Now, a disadvantage of UTM, and it's really the main disadvantage, is just managing them, because you need a consistent naming convention. But ultimately, if you set up UTM codes correctly, and Kym will touch on this a little bit later, this is where you can really start to track ROI properly by channel, and then getting a blended ROI. And of course, it's going to help you identify which audiences generate the highest value in sales. So one of the big topics that's coming up a lot at the moment, especially at a time like this, where some marketing teams are having demands put on them to perform and to get what's called the bottom of the funnel metrics, i.e. the sales through, is where should you put your marketing spend, performance versus brand. And I'll talk about the split in a moment, but the short answer is you have to focus on both. Now, Fountain primarily, we're a performance agency. We try to focus on the bottom of the funnel, but we absolutely recognize that in order to take market share long term, you have to build the brand. And one of the interesting things about building brand properly using digital is this can bring down your cost of acquisition. So it's something to focus on. So one of the questions that's been asked is, well, how do you know where to put your budget? So you can see this diagram here that's from the IPA, and this 60-40 split, what's called the 60-40 rule now, has also been put forward by Google as a evidence-based formula for what they say is maximum productivity on business impact, which is a very googly way of saying that this is how you should split your budget. But the 60-40 rule, it's not going to show you results in 2 weeks. This is something that you have to build over time. But there's a really important thing to consider here, and we see this a lot with all sectors, not just pharma and healthcare, but it's understanding if you have an e-commerce presence, have you fixed your bottom of the funnel? It's what we call the leaky bucket, i.e. it's coming back to this point about conversion rate, the winning of customers. So there's no point, especially if you've got an e-commerce presence, in having 60% of that budget put in the top of the funnel if it's not translating to customers at the bottom. So just to focus on how do you increase conversion rate and win more customers on websites. And just to be clear, with conversion rate, we are focusing on customers here and pure sales, but you can have other sort of macro targets like downloads, clinical downloads, event signups, things of that nature. So conversion rate matters whatever you're focusing on. So this is a methodology that we use, and it works like this. So you've got Google Analytics, which I'm sure you all know about, but one thing that a lot of marketers don't use is what's called session recording software. So this is a bit like having a video camera on the user's shoulder, and it allows you to go in and basically watch recordings of how people are using your website. And this is extremely useful because it doesn't just show you what people are doing, it also shows you what people are not doing. And so by watching enough of these on the right web pages, you're going to start filling in the holes in your leaky bucket. And they're your quick wins. And from there, this is where you're going to start creating hypotheses. So you can have all sorts of different hypotheses. It might be around wording, it could be different types of pictures, it could be the structure of the site. But ultimately, you want some form of scientific methodology, some form of methodology to actually get a significant result. And that's why we use split testing. And that's simply if you have a variant. So if we take a really simple one, which is, say, the phone number at the top of a web page versus the bottom, you would send half the traffic to the one at the top, half to the one at the bottom, and you basically find a winner in really simple terms. And then the cycle continues, and then you continue to increase conversion rate. And the thing about conversion rate is most sites convert in single digits. So out of context, saying to someone, well, we're going to get our website from 2% to 4% doesn't sound very exciting. But what's actually happened there is if you get from 2 to 4%, winning 4 customers or 4 downloads or 4 people coming to your event, you've doubled the number. But what you've also done is half the acquisition cost, which is a crucial thing to understand. And this comes back to this idea of the 3 most important numbers in marketing. They are interlinked. So this is a long-term strategy. We call this the full funnel approach. This is really the holy grail for all digital marketeers. It looks really easy the way I've presented it here on this slide, but this takes time, effort, and analysis of a lot of data. But ultimately, if you want to win the game, if you want to take market share, this is where you need to be going. And really the most important part of this is at the bottom here. So this is this new concept of what we call 80-20, but it's basically the Pareto principle. And what it says is that within your CRM, within your customer base, your lifetime value clients, your most profitable clients are probably going to be the 20% that are driving 80% of the profit. You tend to see this distribution across data sets. So then the question is, once you understand who these customers are, you can then start to change your top of the funnel, your traffic, your content, everything that you do is now then driving towards getting more of your lifetime value or your LTV customers. So just to move on to something a little bit tactical for a moment, because again, this is something that comes up quite a bit, remarketing. So I can definitely hear the thoughts of some of you saying, what about GDPR? And we can talk about that in the Q&A. But yes, you can make this GDPR compliant. Remarketing, when you ask, say, 10, 100 people in a room, marketeers, how long can you follow people for online? The common response is 30 days or 60 days. If it's done properly, you can follow people around for 540 days. And that doesn't mean you have to be in their face for 540 days. But think about it strategically, what it means is that you can serve them lots of different type of content. So it doesn't have to be that you're always pushing product. There's other things that you can show them. So for instance, clinical trial results and events, and Kym will touch on this. And the other thing we see is that remarketing isn't being run across all the channels displayed on the right there. So if you're new to digital marketing, think about all of these channels, set it up so that you can follow people for a year and a half, 540 days. If you know you're running remarketing, it's worth checking that it's running properly, and to really think, well, if I can follow one person for 540 days, how am I going to change up my content every month, say, to be engaging, to build brand, but then ultimately drive sales? And these are just a couple of examples for people who don't know what remarketing ads look like, that we run for Norgine, the Zivil product. So I put this slide in last because this is a question I've had from pharma brands in the past sort of 2 to 3 weeks, is what about Amazon? So I think it's really interesting having a little search on Amazon for OTC and devices. And I would say the vast majority of what I've seen on there isn't great. And what I mean by that is most of the copy that sits on these product pages reads like a patient information leaflet. And the beauty about Amazon is that it has typically high conversion rates, unless your copy isn't good. And it gives you an opportunity to test copy that actually sells. And of course, the other advantages being, we know at a time like this, because I've had products come through my door personally versus say Raw Mail or DHL, they've got a really reliable distribution network. You can get instant traffic through the sponsored product ads. But I think the big objection, the thing people are worried about, is the long term. Do we want to rely on Amazon? So I can't advise all of you individually at this point in time, but what I can say is I think they are part of the channel mix. We don't want to become over-reliant on them, but I think as a way to get product to people now and start building a customer base and start building the brand, I think it should be part of that mix. But we just need to be aware of the commission, the margins, and the potential that there's future pressure from Amazon to drive down your prices. So in summary, we've talked about some real fundamentals in digital marketing around forecasting, and that it's a spreadsheet exercise. We need to think about our numbers first, whether we're starting from afresh or whether we've got existing campaigns. Let's check the numbers and focus on goals. Secondly, we talked about brand versus performance, and I've given you an evidence-based split for thinking about that. But don't forget, fix the leaky bucket, look at your conversion points. Are your web assets converting high enough? Don't forget remarketing at 540 days. And last but not least, remember the Pareto principle. Work towards driving more lifetime value clients. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rob. That's great. So, yeah, that's obviously my area as well. So I'm very interested in what you have to say on that. So that's fantastic. But we'll now move on to, we are saving the best till last. Kym.
I hope that's true. No, that's good.
Absolutely. So just so everyone knows, Kym is the head of the Digital Centre of Excellence for Norgine, European specialist pharmaceutical company, and she focuses on the people side of digital across the company and bringing innovations from other industries to push the pharmaceutical norm. So this is including Norgine's first patient chatbot, medical device app, and global content localisation system, which sounds far too technical for me, Kym. So I'll pass over to you now.
Okay, so what I really wanted to do from here was give a pharma company perspective on all of the different technologies that are coming up and have been talked about today, because I know that I sit in quite a lot of webinars, a lot of conferences when we're allowed, and hear lots of technologies bounded about. And I also go to technology conferences for other industries and see really exciting things that are going on across the world in digital marketing. And sometimes it's very tricky to go, how can I bring it to pharma? We know that we're laggards in this, and we know that we're kind of laggards in embracing those technologies, but we need to start pushing. We need to start really taking on new ideas and new technologies. So I thought I'd give you a bit more of a pharma company perspective on some of those technologies that I think before I started implementing them, I did go, oh, and can we do that? And I know definitely I had that reaction in the company, in Norgine as a whole as well. So I'm only going to pick up on a particular few, but all of the technologies that we've been discussing today, I could touch on at one point or another. I just picked some that I thought were more, I wouldn't say contentious, but could be more scary for a lot of people. So we talked about chatbots, and Chris talked about chatbots. He does talk about them a lot, and I do as well. We decided to do a chatbot at Norgine to solve a real problem, and it was one of the best ways that we kind of took of, there was a true why, there was a true reason to do something, and the technology really fit it. Now, I'm a massive advocate for choosing technologies to fit the problem you're trying to solve rather than just throwing any technology at anything. But just to give you a little bit of a background to it, we obviously have a bowel prep that people take overnight or really, really early, and I'm talking 2, 3, 4 a.m. the morning of their colonoscopy. And we found that the search traffic for the particular bowel prep and all of our previous ones really spiked at that sort of time at night and in the morning. Everyone was trying to find things online of, how do I take this? Are there tips? Who do I ask for help? And we had a look at all of the Google search data and really had a look at when those things are spiking, and it's all out of office hours. Now, although we have a 24-hour medical information line, we started asking some of our patient panels, who would you contact for information? How would you contact the company? And most of them didn't know medical information lines even existed. And to be honest, unless you read to the bottom of that patient information leaflet or work in a pharma industry, you don't know those phone lines even exist. So we started looking at what information was out there on the web, and actually there's so many websites and blogs and forums telling people how to take a medicine. It's scary. I mean, I even anecdotally saw one where it suggested that you take a bath in a bowel prep instead of drinking it, and it would work. And that's quite scary that people are giving that information and we can't really control that. So what we decided to do was actually catch people where they're searching. If people are going online and trying to find that information, let's give them the right information there and then. And so the chatbot for us was catching people in the journey of their search when they actually needed that question answered and giving them the answer instantaneously. And the chatbots worked really well for us. We actually don't promote it to patients, and we still get 2,000 odd conversations happening on that platform on an annually basis, and it's only in English. And we found people are even using Google Translate to ask questions back and forth in different languages and things. We're moving it across Europe, and it's been translated in several countries. And when healthcare professionals know about it, they're really pushing their patients to use it. And I think that's a great example. I think there's some great examples of medicines and also procedures and support things that we can really use chatbots for. But I think we should use them for when we have a great why, and that a patient really needs to know that information and catch them at the right place. And I think that's why it really worked for us. I really want to touch on digital copy, and that's a kind of an odd phrase. Now, Chris really spoke about being personal and also focusing on your customer. And we're going through a massive transformation at the moment where we don't necessarily have that face-to-face contact to explain our messaging and give those reasons and give that explanation. And healthcare professionals are spending more and more time online because of the nature of what's going on. They're spending more time on websites trying to find information, or even kind of social channels. And we're competing against other companies, but other industries as well, for their time, their capacity, their information overload, and their attention. Now, Facebook quote that, and I've seen it in a few places, and I think Google also say it, there is an attention span of 8 seconds on average across the internet for people. 8 seconds to grab their attention. How long does it take you to read some of the long ads that are on the internet from, say, pharma companies, but also these particular examples? Now, I thought about borrowing some examples from the BMJ website of pharmaceutical ads. I thought that was a bit cruel, trying to point people out that have a lot of text on their ads. So I chose some Facebook examples to try and be less contentious. Now, with all of these kind of digital ads, if you're scrolling through a feed, or you're even scrolling a website and it's a banner ad at the top of your screen, you've got to catch people's attention super quickly. And we have a tendency as a company and as an industry to choose kind of the long text. Both of these examples have long text at the start. And we're used to putting in a load of caveats and a load of extra information into a headline. So it might be a drug for a specific condition in specific patients in specific trials, and there's lots of caveats. We haven't quite mastered, and I haven't seen too many masterings of those quick headlines that capture attention and can be caught in these big feeds of lots of other industries. It's a bit easier when you're going in as a pharmaceutical rep face to face with a detail aid or some piece of material in front of them. You've got almost their undivided attention. But when you're competing in this massive marketplace, in this massive field, you need to be quick and to the point. And that's a massive mind shift as well. That's a massive thought shift from people to try and go to those more kind of meet the perfect suitcase lines rather than the whole paragraph before. And that's something we really need to think about as we move to more of a digital point of view. So Rob mentioned UTM links. We use UTM links all the time, and it's one thing that I will use a lot, and we try and do in absolutely everything. I wanted to show you kind of what the UTM URL looks like, because a lot of people ask me, what are you talking about, adding code things? As soon as people hear the word code, it's like, they're a technical person, I don't deal with that. We actually use a little spreadsheet that automatically creates all these codes for us. Someone fills in whether it's a banner ad or an MPU, and they fill in what source there is, they fill in the campaign name, they fill in what the content is, and it automatically generates that URL for them that they can then use in their materials. But also, it means that once we've done all that and we can keep track of that in one place, our Google Analytics is so much better for us. We have so much more insight. But also, I think going back to Chris's point of this omni-channel approach, we can then also see who's scanning our QR codes from our full page ads in journal ads, who's scanning it on a leave piece, who's looking at a poster in a waiting room and scanning that QR code, because that's when we start joining all the channels together, and that's when we get the best insight. And we've particularly looked at 7 days worth of data for this particular area, and I've only just kind of looked at the key bits, but we can then go actually deeper and look at bounce rate for those particular areas. If 1,000 people are scanning a leave piece and going to our website, but only one of them stays on that site, that's not good traffic. And I can say 1,000 people see the site, but they all bounce. I don't want that traffic on my site anymore. I'll take it off that because it's distracting then. But it gives us much more information, and we can use those in absolutely everything that we do. Tiny tip, if you are reviewing content on any of the copy approval sites, the first thing I always ask when I see a QR code or check is, does it have a UTM code in it? And if not, it's not going through. So Rob mentioned remarketing, and a lot of people go to me, well, we don't use Google Ads, we don't use all of the Google Display Network, we only use the journal platforms and things because we only promote to healthcare professionals. Now, almost all of the advertising companies and also journal online advertisers that I've spoken to can do some form of remarketing or do some form of smarter ad placements. And in a world where we're all trying to reduce the amount of budget we're spending on everything, and also we all want to be a bit smarter and reduce our cost per acquisition cost or cost per click, we need to be thinking about a better way of choosing advertising space as well. We've looked at some particular areas, and we've used it particularly to start finding people that look at our clinical trials. So if someone looks at a particular clinical trial and accesses it that is about our particular medicine, we then target that individual person who's looked at that clinical trial with more content about our brand that they've looked at. We know they're interested, so they're probably better traffic to have. They're probably a better individual to talk to. We can give them more branded content, and we know that they're slightly interested, and it means that we've got a better touch point with that person, and we've used that before. Now, I know Rob left this one for last, and it's one that is always kind of, everyone has a sharp intake of breath at Norgine when I talk about Amazon. Now, we are selling one of our, it's actually a medical device over Amazon at the moment, and looking at other products we can do. Everyone says, well, prescription-only medicines can't be sold on Amazon, so don't even talk to me, I'm not interested. Okay, we might not use Amazon as a platform and things, but a lot of the principles of what we talked about and all of the principles behind selling on the kind of Amazon platforms or e-commerce in general apply to everything we do. We as a pharma industry create apps and patient diaries and loads of different things that are not maybe not brand specific or branded, that can be promoted to the general public. And what we normally do is we give it to healthcare professionals to give out. And okay, that might work for some things, it might work, and that GP might remember for that one particular patient they have a year. But actually, people, the promotion you can do online and the principles behind the kind of e-commerce side and the social media advertising is brilliant, because actually you can go to the point and you can use the funnel technique to really go for everyone with that disease area, everyone who might be particularly interested, down to particular conversions of downloading your app or downloading the patient diary or even accessing the materials. And that then is starting to show you that ROI of that material creation as well. We all too much just create more patient materials, or we create more stuff for education reasons, give it out, and we don't really know if anyone's accessed it or used it or even interested. And actually those are the principles that we should be using in the future. And I also do want to, one kind of caveat with Amazon, they have been quite tricky to deal with from a pharma company, because we're very used to, as a pharma company, going, we're very reputable here, have our information, we've approved it, the end. But actually, we're seeing in this environment right now, the sales of particular things we're doing are increasing, because people are going to more online platforms, more online pharmacies, and trying to find their things online and willing to pay for them for convenience or just to not leave the house. And actually, I think more and more people, after the crisis ends and lockdown is eased, will be going to those online platforms and really driving those sales through those, because I think that, they'll get used to it, and it's that convenience aspect. So it's worth looking at whether there's opportunities for some of the either medical devices or over-the-counter medicines that we create. Now, I personally am busier than ever, and I'm busier than I was in the office, kind of working in the digital space. And I know that everyone's trying desperately to use digital now, and they're all trying. I say this to a lot of people in my organization, because trying to get down some of the barriers that people are scared of using a lot of these techniques is quite tricky. And to me, we all need to adapt to change, because there are people on our heels, like the Amazons of the world or Googles of the world, trying to get into healthcare, that if we don't adapt and change, we're not going to survive something like this. But I think we can, if we do embrace some of these technologies and take on some of this change that's going to happen and that will continue in the future. So I'm hoping that this massive shift will make us adapt and make us survive and get better day in, day out. Thank you. So if anyone does want to add me on LinkedIn, I've added the QR code as well, but feel free.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kym. That's great. Again, lots more questions have come in. And all three of you nearly stuck to your 15 minutes allocated. But yes, so what I'll do is I'll just pick the top questions that have been asked, and the ones that are most frequent, so that you can give the kind of most value to everyone listening. First question, I'll just jump straight in. First question to you, Chris. So the question is, how does this go hand in hand with field force? And in this is relation to the chatbots, as you don't want to take that contact away from the key account manager.
So I think, I see chatbots as a tool to support the face-to-face activity that a pharma company would do. So I see them supporting medical information by mopping up lots of the common questions that actually can just be answered by data that's in the SPC and the patient information leaflet. And I also see them supporting field force by, offering opportunities for people, once they've answered the question, they can offer an opportunity for somebody to book a meeting with the rep. So again, kind of linking those channels together. So I don't see chatbots as something that competes with the field force or looks to replace the field force or looks to replace a medical information officer. I see them as complementary, adding, additional customer service there. And also, of course, chatbots are available 24/7. So, if a customer has a good relationship with the account manager and has a question during the day, then they're going to ring the account manager up. But if they've got a question, late at night, then they're unlikely to call that account manager, and they're going to have to look for an alternative way of getting an answer to that question. And that's where I think chatbots fit in.
Also, can I just add, when we looked at the stats of what we were doing, we found there's a lot of people that wouldn't normally even ask the questions. So there are a group of people that, if it's a short, quick answer, they just don't want to ring someone or email someone for something, and actually they prefer that sort of platform where they get that quick instantaneous answer. And the fact you provided it is then another boost for your brand, essentially, of going, well, they've supported me there, so I'll remember that in the future.
Brilliant. So next question for you, Rob, was quite a popular one. Was how important does the visual aspect play into the process, into the fountain process?
So you obviously need both. I think that the way to come at this is how a website's built. So the old school way of building websites, it was all about aesthetics. What was the brand proposition, right? What was the color palette? Does this represent us? The new way of building websites or rebuilding them, building landing pages, is to understand the sort of the data underneath it. So where are people coming from when they come to a particular landing page of a website? Is that page relevant to where they've come from? But whatever happens, even if you sort of have data underpinning the redesign or the building of a website, and you've got your visual, your conceptual stuff on top, you have to remember that when you put it out into the world, how good a job you've done is really defined by the users and the visitors. So how well can they use the website? Can they find what they're looking for? And ultimately, do they convert? And so when we say conversion, I mainly talk about sales because that's what people care about, but it could be anything from coming to an event, downloading a shareholder report. It's whatever you kind of set as the conversion. But the last point is that ultimately what gets those numbers up is conversion rate optimization, which is the process I talked about earlier.
Cool, fantastic. And I know we're going to overrun a little bit, but final question for you, Kym. And you knew it was going to come. It's on compliance and chatbots. So how do you get over that hurdle?
Okay, so I spent a long time working with lots of different people from a compliance, quality, computer systems validation, and they're all, and legal even, they're all in that kind of sphere of compliance. And actually, one of the best ways I found to overcome some of the objections is to describe the why and get people to sit in the shoes of a patient. Okay, you've got to find some information now at X o'clock at night. Go for it and try and find something and see what you get. That was quite interesting as an option, but that obviously doesn't cover everyone's issues. Now, I must admit, I kind of went down the road of you accept FAQs, right? Okay, so you accept agreed answers for FAQs. Well, imagine you had a search bar at the top that found the right FAQ answer. Okay, and then put a little face on it. Okay, well, essentially you've got a chatbot here. So is there anything wrong with that particular process? No. Okay, and we've got agreed answers, and you're not going to come up with a random answer. It's not making up its own answer. It's not an intelligent robot writing its own answers. So it's all set. Oh, okay, that makes much more sense. And actually, it was trying to distill the process into something really simple and kind of pick apart the little pieces rather than them assuming that it was all artificial intelligence and scary and it was going to come up with its own answer and become sentient and roll the world. So I think a lot of that came up to it. And actually, once you pull it down into those slightly easy to understand things, a lot of people are happier to approve things like that.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. I don't want to keep everyone from their Fridays. Thank you very much again, Chris, Rob, and Kym. That was really insightful, and especially the questions at the end as well. Thank you very much. I think we'll end there. So I hope everyone has a great weekend. Hope to see you all soon, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.